welcome to Guides for Brides, the wedding podcast. I'm Nikita from Guides for Brides, and in this episode, we'll be discussing the journey of planning a fusion, blended or interfaith wedding. An area that, when I speak to couples at events, is growing and sometimes comes with a lot of pressure and confusion and questions. You know, things like, how do we fairly and respectfully give a nod to our cultures or faiths at the wedding? Is there a set way to do things for this kind of cultural blend? Or do we need a specific kind of venue for this wedding? What about food, decor, all of those kinds of things? So I really wanted to discuss this in the podcast because I'm now speaking to so many more couples who are wanting to have a fusion, blended or interfaith wedding. But I'm not an expert in the slightest. So I felt in order to make this a helpful conversation that we could all learn from, I would need to invite a couple of guests into the conversation. And I couldn't think of a better pair. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Latoya Patel from SW Events and the Asian Wedding Club and Nina Beer from Occasion Queens. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, really, really good. Thank you. I hope you're both well as well. Now, you've both planned and supported quite a lot of fusion, blended and interfaith weddings. Hence why I thought it'd be a great idea to get you both on the podcast, this discussion. So would you mind introducing yourselves to our listeners and explaining your individual backgrounds on this? Latoya, I'll come to you first and then to Nina.
Sure, thanks, Nikita. It's been so nice to be invited onto this podcast today. My background is a little bit international in some regard. So I myself am from a Caribbean background, and I've spent my youth between here and the South Pacific, on top of which I have married into an Indian family. So I have experienced the whole blending of a wedding and blending of your sort of cultural backgrounds, because it doesn't stop at your wedding, let's be honest. Since we started this business, which was back in 2012, we have focused on planning weddings with couples, and our primary market is the Asian wedding market. We have also started, it's a work in progress, a membership called the Asian Wedding Club as well. That's kind of us, and the majority of the weddings, I would say this year, having looked at our calendar, more than 50% of the weddings that we're doing are actually for couples with a blended, fusion, interfaith, whatever you would like to call it, background.
Amazing. So Nina, would you like to introduce yourself before we hop into this discussion?
So my name's Nina and I run Occasion Queens. I have 18 years in the events industry, which I really hate admitting to make me sound so old. But we were the first company in the UK to specialise purely in on-the-day coordination. So we don't do full wedding planning. We literally come in and help execute what a couple has planned. As the same as Latoya, I've done lots and lots of blended fusion, multicultural, multi-faith weddings. Because of the nature and how we work, it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly till nearer the time of the weddings what we do. And we do quite a lot of weddings, but I would say a half to 3/4 of them are definitely kind of fusion weddings. And like Latoya, I've also had a fusion wedding myself. So I'm Jewish and my husband isn't. So he had to play a bit of catch up there. We had a beautiful wedding where we integrated a lot of the Jewish beliefs, faiths and traditions into our wedding day as well.
You both have the right level of authority to have this discussion, which brings me on to the question, why are we discussing this? Certainly at Guides for Brides, we've noticed a huge increase in questions from couples who are planning an interfaith or multicultural wedding. Have you guys noticed this as well? I mean, you both said you're doing a lot of weddings that are interfaith, multicultural yourselves.
Yeah, so I'll jump in there first. Even from inquiry stage, people are being quite upfront about what it is that they're trying to achieve and what their different backgrounds are. So we are seeing a lot more of that. Even I think it was about a week ago, we had another inquiry where they were very detailed actually in their inquiry about what it was they were looking for. And then right now, I think one of the couples we're working with, they have a background where one of them is of an Indian background and the other one is of an Irish background. They are doing something very different, I would say, because typically people would host two separate ceremonies. They have decided that they don't wish to do that. I feel as though when you're blending, as long as your family has come along for the ride with you, there's a lot that you can do. But yes, we are definitely seeing an increase in what people want to do and how far they're prepared to take it. So this, what I've just mentioned with doing one ceremony that has aspects of both things, it's not something that is done as the norm. Typically people will split their ceremonies.
Amazing. Nina, you're nodding in agreement there.
Yeah, definitely. I have done a huge amount of weddings that are fusion, as I said. Like last year alone, I actually made a list. Last year alone, I did Mormon, Buddhist, Greek, Jewish, Christian, Chinese, Asian, and humanist weddings. So, and some of them blended, some of them weren't. It was all about making sure that myself as a business owner, I knew exactly what I was talking about, went away and did my research, had to look into all the different traditions and things and how we could blend this in a way that was respectful to the couple's culture and belief, but also sensitive to things that they liked and wanted to encompass, and just making sure that we weren't doing anything that was ever going to upset family or friends, or also, dare I mention, cultural appropriation, and making sure that we kind of blended it in a way that was very respectful to what we were looking at doing. So
yeah, so that's, I don't know if I can continue here, but that's a really good point that Nina made at the end, about the cultural appropriation. So we're probably going to be quite candid, I think, in what we discussed.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Please dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say it's your own fault for inviting me and Nina.
Reckoned with these two.
But it is a really, really good point. So, for example, the couple I was mentioning, where one of Indian heritage and the other one is Irish heritage, one of the things we had to do is, because neither of them were actually overly familiar with the type of wedding ceremony that would be associated with a Hindu ceremony. So we actually invited a priest to speak to them, a Hindu wedding priest to speak to them and take them through what's happening with it. And I was very clear that actually, if you're going to have the ceremony, then you kind of need to have it with the elements that would make it whole. You can't just say, I want to do just this bit and just this bit, and then that's it. Otherwise, that's something completely different, and we're not calling that an Asian wedding ceremony of any variety. So
that's exactly. But also at the other end of scale for that one, Latoya, is that there are ways of incorporating cultures that you might like, that then doesn't mean that we're being disrespectful. So, for example, I had a big Jewish wedding last year, but they really love Mexican culture, Mexican food, and everything to do with Mexico. They were obsessed with it. They loved it. So what we did was that we looked at a way of making sure that they had a Mexican theme, but we looked at colors, and we looked at the type of food that we were having, and we were making sure that the food was Mexican themed, but it was kosher food at the same time. But we weren't then looking at having any pictures or skulls or anything along those lines, like the Day of the Dead things. Like, that wasn't going to come into play here, because that starts crossing a line. What we were doing was taking the elements that were fun and interactive that they enjoyed without being disrespectful to Mexico.
I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's a very, very fine balance.
It can be. It really can be. But I guess the thing with it is that there's a lot of room to play when it comes to a blended or mixed or interfaith or whatever variety of wedding you're having. There's a lot of room to play, and actually it's a lot of fun, although it can come with its complications, which we will discuss as we go further in this podcast. It's definitely something that it just really energizes, I think, because you get to bring the best of both worlds to the table, which is an incredible thing to do. And it may be that one side of the family has zero experience of what the other side of the family, it sort of knows and loves. And so being able to introduce that to each side of the family is actually something quite amazing to be able to do. And it probably will help with the future of the marriage as well, that each side kind of now knows a little bit more about what the other side is up to. And how they celebrate and what they love to, what they love about their celebrations. And the final thing I'll mention on this actually is that I think across all of this and through this podcast, what we need to remember is that interfaith, for example, it can be a bit more than meets the eye. So although both parties may, for example, both look Indian, it doesn't mean that they come from the same background. It could be that one has an Indian Bengali heritage and the other one has an Indian Gujarati or Punjabi heritage. So there'll be similarities across the board, but there will also be things that are slightly different, particularly in the way that the ceremonies are conducted and some of the traditions that the families might enjoy.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic point, because, there is more than meets the eye. And I think it's also important to say that this is not something that's new either. So if you're worried about it at all, it's not new. You're not the first people to do this. I mean, my grandparents, one of them is Jewish and the other one is Catholic, and they got married in the 60s when that really wasn't done. There's like quite
that was when it was new. It really isn't a new thing, and if you're scared or feeling a bit daunted by it, that's totally normal. I mean, would you say that that's something that you're experiencing as well with your couples?
I don't think, and I think this is a really important point, I don't think this is new at all. I think the industry is waking up to what they need to do to cater for everybody. And the whole world is so much more open these days to everybody's thoughts and feelings and beliefs and cultures, and being sensitive to that. I keep on saying that word because it's so important at the moment that we are respectful towards everybody. And therefore, I think that actually you'll find that we're playing catch up to how the world is working, and that this is not new. It's just more apparent now because we want to see so much vibrancy within our couples. We want to embrace everything that they're about, and we're making weddings so much more personal now that people are open to embracing all of these different elements into one day.
Where I would extend from that is that I do think people are getting bolder in their choices. So previously, I would say if you were going to blend, it would be a very traditional blend. So exactly a ceremony as you would expect it in one culture, exactly a ceremony as you would expect it in another. Or it would be, you know, this particular event or this particular day of events is going to be very dedicated to one side of the family, one culture, and then we're going to do another day of events. It's going to be very dedicated on its own to another. So that's how we will honor everything. Whereas now, and I was actually just speaking with a bride this morning before this call, where one of them is of an English heritage, the other is of an Indian heritage. They are doing a combination. They're doing a 2-day event, and they've got a church wedding and Indian reception on one of the days, and they've got the Hindu ceremony and a very sort of casual outdoor, more of a nod to the English traditions happening in terms of their reception style on day one. So they have actually completely blended the days so that they're experiencing both cultures on the same day. So when I say people are getting bolder, I think that the couples are getting to a stage where they're like, well, actually, this is who we are, this is what we like doing, and they're more prepared, I would say, now to have those conversations with family and say, well, this is what we would like to do, or this is how we would like to do it, but we are going to honour both things. I just think that people are getting bolder with what they enjoy, and remembering that a lot of people who are British born and have heritages from all over the globe, they consider themselves to be British as well. So within themselves,
very good point. Yeah,
they
absolutely.
are both British and work from wherever else. So
yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that. Well, that brings us nicely on to our next question. What is the first step? So say myself and my partner, we've just gotten engaged and we're from totally different cultural backgrounds, or maybe even some similar cultural backgrounds, but they've got different elements to them. How do I approach wedding planning? Assuming those initial stages are probably going to take a bit more time.
So, Nina, do you want to go first on this actually? Or
Go on then.
You go. You go. I'm talking a lot.
No, that's good. I'm loving how passionate you are. I'm saying to script, just so we're all clear here. Latoya,
I'm really not.
Right.
Very true. True to form.
I'm being so quiet. I'm not normally. Okay, so I think this is actually what's really important. And another thing that was really coming through is that we're talking about family. Family is essential to all of this. It is where it starts, but it's where it comes from. So it's a really easy first step, right? And that is to talk to your family. Start with the basics on this and make sure that you get their buy-in and you set their expectations from the very, very start. And that's so, so important. For example, with my wedding, the very basics was what day of the week it was going to start on. Like, where are we at with that? And my grandma asked me not to do it on a Saturday. Okay. So there we go. That ruled out a lot of dates that I hadn't thought of until I'd spoken to her. And again, that was her request. That was coming from her. I would have happily got married on a Saturday because I'm Jewish, but the way that I conduct myself and the way that I respect my faith doesn't integrate, and that doesn't come part of my week. So, but for her, that was really important. So my expectation and my boundary was set from the very, very start. But also then looking at what traditions can be included and what can be left out of your day that your family would feel comfortable with, that you have honoured and respected, again, that word, your culture, your heritage, your faith. But at the same time, understanding that there are definitely things that could be left out. And then one of the things that I really love, and I think is where both families come together, which is super important, is the fun stuff. And normally that's around the dancing, right? So that's a really good part where not only are you starting with the basics in terms of looking at what your family's expectations are, but also then seeing how your families can then blend themselves and come together and how to break that ice. And I think dancing is a really, really good one when it comes to that. Looking at your guests, are there people that your family feels should be invited that you might not necessarily have thought of?
That's always
a biggie. And that massively influences so much at the beginning, looking at your venue, you know. So not only we knuckle down like the day of the week or the time of the year or something along those lines that it can or can't happen on, but also what are their expectations in terms of how many people you should be inviting and who you should be inviting. So getting all that basic stuff done at the beginning will really, really help.
I'm going to follow through this point about expectations, if I may.
Yeah, please do.
So what is really interesting, so this randomly happened, as in we didn't plan for this to happen recently, but we had an inquiry where we ended up speaking to the father of the groom first. He was the person that inquired. He's Indian and lives in India still. His son lives in the States. And his daughter-in-law-to-be is from the States, lives in the States, of a Christian background. We ended up speaking to the father of the groom first. He explained what he thought the wedding was going to be about, etc. He then asked us to speak with the bride and groom. We spoke with them together, but separate to the parents. And then the bride and groom asked us to speak with her parents separately. So this was a very interesting exercise. And the reason I'm sharing this story is because in speaking with the various different parties, we were able to sort of understand what people really wanted. So we're not talking about sort of, you know, the very specifics about a ceremony that they wanted to see. We're talking about, for example, the mother of the bride was saying she really just wants to have like an hour of a moment where she can hang out with her daughter on the day. The father of the bride was saying, I don't really mind what ceremony they host. I would just love to be able to walk my daughter down the aisle, which is possible in both traditions, right? But he wasn't aware of what was and was not possible. So they were talking to us in this context in terms of the key things that if they sort of strip back everything in terms of specifics around ceremony, specifics around, you know, tradition, etc., if they think about what they would really love to have or experience with their daughter's wedding, that's what they were talking to us about. And it was actually a really lovely conversation. And at the end of it, all of what they wanted, they could have had, whether they hosted a Hindu wedding, whether they hosted a Christian wedding, they could have had everything. But the parents didn't know this. And this is the point that I'm making. It's quite important to have these conversations with family and to try and get underneath exactly what the deal breakers might be for them, or exactly what the key things are that they are looking to have. Because remembering, from the minute you were born, probably they've been imagining your wedding.
Very true.
So they have, especially depending on the culture that you come from, weddings will be a huge deal in your family and in your culture. So I'm genuinely not lying when I say that they may have been imagining this since you were a child. And so when you've come home and you said, Mum, I've fallen in love with whomever, and it means that we are going to have a blended wedding of some variety, they are going through their own process of letting go and sort of welcoming in this new aspect to the wedding day that they might never have envisaged before. So you kind of got to give them a little bit of room to adjust. I've experienced it, like, personally myself with our wedding. Like it takes a bit of time to adjust. So it's just really important to really have those conversations, because your wedding planning journey will be awful, truthfully awful, if you don't try and bring your family along for the ride. But you've got to kind of do it in a respectful and gentle fashion in some ways. And some parents will be more sort of hard and fast about what they want than others. Others will be super relaxed about it and brilliant. Kudos to you. And, you know, all the best. But for those of you who are having a slightly more difficult experience, do sit down and have a conversation with them. Like it may not be the thing that you want to do, but you don't want to have a wedding, surely, where your parents just don't bother to turn up if you've got a good relationship with them.
Oh God, let's not go that far, shall we?
Listen, it has cropped up. It has cropped up, and I say it because we do know of parents who have flat out refused to attend a wedding. So you know, and that's not what we're trying to do.
This is important. But this is why this is important now, because if you have those conversations at the start and you set those expectations, you can then use that as leverage. So if then somebody does turn around later on and says, okay, I'm not cool with this, I want this, this, and this. You can be like, well, I'm sorry, relative, but you didn't tell me that. This hasn't been, we're too far down the line now, and we tried to establish these things with you at the very beginning. So it does actually give you a little bit of leverage if later on things aren't going too well, that you actually have put the effort in to try and make sure that this works for everybody. But also, I'm just going to bring it back to one point before we move on and say that don't forget, this is your day.
It's true.
So although we do have to, and very much when we're looking at faiths and cultures, respect our families, our friends, wants and needs, and that goes across every wedding, because we're trying to make sure everybody's happy on your wedding day, whether it be down to a catering for gluten-free or vegan meal, or blending traditions within a ceremony or something like that. At the end of the day, this is your day, and whatever happens, you have to look back on your day and feel that you thoroughly enjoyed every aspect of it, and that it represented you both. So although we are absolutely rabbiting on about respect, sensitivity, family, and how important those are all to a fusion wedding, never ever lose sight of the fact that this is your wedding day.
Exactly that. And to a degree, fight for it. You don't have those conversations, but openly have those conversations. Do not do the ostrich maneuver, I guess, is the message here. Do not stick your head in the sand and think it's going away. It's not going away.
And you spend a lot of money on a wedding. You want to be happy with how your money is being spent, or how your parents' money is being spent, however you're funding this. You want to be sure that what you've spent your money on is going to reflect just you and your partner, and you want to look back on your photos or your wedding video afterwards and go, you know what, that was a bloody brilliant day. I really enjoyed that. That was the best possible day that we could have had. That's where it's really key. Which brings us nicely on to the point about being worried about family members who might be a little bit more restrictive than others, or are very strict followers of a certain belief or cultural tradition. How do you handle that? And I mean, I know that we've talked about talking, but there might not be any room for maneuver. So what do we do about that kind of thing?
So I think you have to decide how important that is to you. And if it is something that is incredibly important to you, then you will need to figure out a way to make it work. But if it's something that you really don't want, and you're okay with the consequence of not wanting it, carry on.
Yeah, I think it very much goes back again to setting their expectations, actually. But speaking to those guests, and I do see this quite a bit actually within Jewish weddings, because there are different levels of orthodoxy within Judaism. So you will have some family that will keep strictly kosher, and then you may have some people who are more liberal with their faith, like I am, or something along those lines. And actually, it's again about having conversations with them and talking to them about what would make them feel comfortable at their wedding. You want them to be part of it. You want them to fully embrace how you're going to be living your life, and hopefully they respect that. But actually, what can you do to make them a little bit more comfortable on your day? And is it that actually, for that example, that they don't want to eat the kosher food that's coming out because it's still not kosher enough for them, but therefore you're going to get it in from an outside caterer in a different way, or something along those lines? It's just about talking, and it's about communication. It really is, and it's about making sure that everybody is on the same page, but that you have taken into consideration people's thoughts and feelings and beliefs.
And it may be that if you're open with people, so if you're aware that someone has a very strict view on something and they wish for you to uphold that as part of your wedding celebrations, and you have decided for whatever reason that actually it's not something that you wish to do, and be open with them about it, because it may be that they decide, okay, I love you, but I'm not coming. And that might be okay too. And it might actually be better for everybody, and you can do something separate with them to celebrate. It's not the end of the world necessarily if people don't come, but the last thing you want is for someone to turn up not knowing you know what they want, and you know you're not doing it. And you know how close they are to you, and you know that they're likely to go and have a conversation with your parents. And so your parents are going to get it in the neck. So it's much better not to have that happen on the physical day or days of your wedding event.
Absolutely.
So I think this is where we're going with this when we talk about communication. We sound like therapists.
We are, aren't we? I think that's what our job is. Pretty sure.
Certainly over the pandemic it was.
It certainly was, yes.
Oh yeah.
And that brings us now into the sort of second half of this podcast. We've talked about why we're talking about this, the sort of key problems, but what about actually starting to plan that day, how would you suggest couples start planning their days? Would you say there is an easier element of the wedding that they can control first, or that could be planned first? Who wants to start on this one?
Personally, I think there are a few places that are you get the biggest bang for buck, let me put it that way, when you're planning. So food, hugely popular place to kind of fuse things, because who doesn't like to eat? So it is one of those things with food and drink. It is definitely a place where flavor is everything. If you think about weddings, especially when you're talking about hosting, if you invited people over to your house, you're normally going to feed them. So it's a very sort of known place to kind of host people and to make them feel welcome in your environment. So playing with the different food types is an incredible thing to do, and there are various different ways that you can do that, but I'd say food is a huge topic, because you can just do so much with it. Then you've got entertainment, and then you've got, I would say, decor is sort of behind that, but I'd say food and entertainment are the big two areas to do most of the fun stuff, and to really be able to bring traditions together. Whereas the decor side of things, I think it's more of a finishing touch actually, but actually there's a lot you can still do with decor to kind of really lend itself to one culture or another.
Just going a bit more deeper into what Latoya has spoken about, if we look at food, for example, and let's say that you're trying to blend two different kinds of food backgrounds, is look at the different parts of your day. So the big thing I would suggest is that where you're having your kind of main reception, main meal, wedding breakfast type scenario, that's where you want to incorporate the food that the most amount of people are going to eat. And I look at Indian catering then and how spicy it is and things like that. And if we're coming from a typically English background, they might not be able to tolerate the levels of spice that half of the family are coming from might be able to. That's quite common. I've spoken previously about how I've got a wedding this year who are incorporating Indian catering and also a roast dinner. Can't wait to see how that one's going to come off.
Just on that topic, Nina, I think it raises a point that even if you do something like that, still be aware if there's certain meat types, for example, that one side of the family does not eat. So if you're going to do what Nina's described that one of her couples is doing, try not to serve beef and pork if you can help it. So
very good point, actually. There are lots of different religions and faiths that actually, those are the two big meats that don't get eaten. So actually you might save yourself some problems there if you just avoid those.
Yeah, it's not saying no to a roast dinner, but maybe go with a chicken or a lamb.
Conversations that will happen as you start talking about what you're doing with your family and things like that. But also when it comes to food, is look at the parts of the day where it's a choice. So for example, if you're having a drinks reception with some form of canapé, then this is where you can blend it, because people can then choose what they want, right? And in the evening, if you're having any kind of late night snacks, again, you can choose. Still be sensitive to the type of foods that you're providing. So again, going back to what we just talked about, you might not want to provide pork or something along those lines, but it's a way of kind of starting to encompass different cultures. So for example, I had a wedding recently where they wanted Italian food for the mains, which was amazing, but in the evening they changed it up slightly and did something a bit more traditional, and then they also had like baklava and things like that. Again, blended everything from every family and brought it throughout the day, but making sure that the main part of the day where the food's being provided is something that the majority of people are going to be eating. And then when people can pick and choose what they want, that's where you can have some fun and play. When it comes to entertainment, as I hit on, like dancing, this is such a big part. It's so much fun. It breaks the ice. It brings the families together. I've done a Asian wedding where I had Asian families from an English background doing a ceilidh dancing in the evening, which was amazing. And all of his cousins and his uncles and everyone were in kilts. And I had the bride's uncles, who were all Scottish, they were teaching them how to tie up their shoes and put everything on properly. And it was just this wonderful thing to see, was how everyone was helping each other with dress and with the dancing later on. I've had Christians doing Israeli dancing. And even just last week, I had a bride who was Turkish Cypriot, and they were doing traditional folk dancing with a testi, which is a clay pot that you smash. And his family is Italian. So all of the Italians were getting involved with this dancing, and it was just wonderful. And the excitement from the other side of the family when they can see people who aren't from their culture or their faith getting involved is so good. They love it. They want to teach you. They want to get involved, and it breaks the ice. It's just a wonderful thing to experience.
It is. And even musical instruments is another place. So we've just done one, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and in the evening they had a dole player, which is a type of drum. They had two of those people playing alongside the DJ with a saxophonist as well.
Wow.
And it became a bit of a performance. So although people can still dance to the music, because it's music that you recognize, that's the other thing, is it's music that people will recognize. It also meant that those people who are maybe not avid dancers could still be on the dance floor and, just doing a little bit of big box, little box, if you like, but being able to sort of be in amongst it and watch a performance as well, and you're getting to enjoy a little bit of someone else's culture.
Do you know what, you just remind me, I had a dole drummer at in a synagogue, so it wasn't just you just remind me, so it wasn't just that they were at a venue and they were blending. I actually had the bride had a friend who was a dole drummer, and he brought the drum, and on the way out, as everyone was singing the Hava Nagila, he started with the drum. He literally said, I've listened to it a bit on YouTube. Like, he just made it up and went with it, and it was amazing. Like, these are the kind of things that are
you can do it.
Like, it's incredible. Yeah,
absolutely.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
It makes me think of, like, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where they get the family involved in the sort of dancing around in the circle, and that's when it just becomes a massive joyous moment for them. And I've also seen it in photos and videos for couples doing the money dance. That's amazing when you watch them back.
It really is a lot of fun.
There's so much, like, so one of the things that I've always loved is like the entrances that couples and families do into the reception. So I know it's quite popular with sort of Nigerian and African weddings, and actually, as I recently found out, Caribbean weddings, they kind of do that too. You'd think I'd know something about a Caribbean wedding, wouldn't you? I don't. But the point being, it is something that I've actually seen filtering across as well to more Asian weddings. So Asian weddings, you may have like family entrances, and normally there's music playing as the families enter, but this sort of vibe of people like full on dancing into the room and doing their own little thing. I have seen that filtering across a little bit more as well. And remembering that receptions are receptions. There's not really an awful lot of sort of formal elements to a reception for most people's receptions. So the things that you can do in a reception, you can do a lot more there than you might be able to do around a ceremony. Let me put it that way. But have fun with it. And if you can, and this is going to be, I don't mean for this to be a plug, but if you do wish to work with somebody who can help you kind of execute these ideas, and you do have the ability to afford that, definitely consider doing it, because you just don't know. So where Nina and I are just talking about examples here of just things that have happened with the couples that we've worked with, we happen to know this because this is what we do. This is our job.
Absolutely. And you can't really put a price on something like that, where actually you have helped them to a certain extent, that they've managed to actually execute an event that they have been dreaming of for a really long time, and then suddenly, because they've fallen in love with this other person that is from a different culture or different religion, they've gone, oh, might need to rethink that.
And just how to navigate it, and these types of conversations that we're having. If you're the only person in your family that has ventured into this realm, you may not have other people in your family you can speak to about how to do this.
But also, you might be the first person to do it. It's not or you might be the first person to go down that particular faith or culture outside of your own.
Absolutely.
That's quite a big statement to make. And that can be quite hard. And actually, just having that sounding board from someone, so you have the evidence almost to go to your family and be like, right, well, I've spoken to my planner, my wedding coordinator, whoever it might be. They've done it before, and they've done it like this, and it worked really well because of A, B, and C. And almost like we give you the confidence and the backing to go and have those quite difficult conversations sometimes.
They can be.
I feel like we're making this out to be too much doom and gloom. There are definitely families who are so like, oh my God, whatever you want, just bring it on, let's do it. here's all the money we're going to throw at you to make this amazing event. Like, you know, I wish there was more of them, but like it can be amazing. And there are absolutely families who are very, very open to this, but it is new territory. So if there's anything that we can do to make that new territory just a little bit safer for people, that's what we try and do.
Yeah, so I think just to my final bit on this point, just leading on from what Nina was saying there, is that like for the most part, I would say that the majority of our weddings that we've had that have been a blend have been very fun to be involved in. We've been speaking with families who have an openness to sort of how to do things. I would say the one place that families do tend to be a little bit more, I'm going to say structured, that's the word I'm going to choose here, is the ceremony. But having said that, for the most part, people have been really open about it. And where they haven't been, and there's been a journey to go on, we have been able to support people through that. Please don't think that your starting point is, oh my God, I'm going to be uphill from here onward. That is not always the case. And it's likely that you two will have been together for a little bit of time before you decide to get married.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's going to be new to the family that, you know, this person is in your life. For the most part, just be open-minded. And I guess the point being, it's not going to be what everybody, like, if your parents will have been thinking about your wedding for a long time. And I think that's probably the point I would come back to. And it's a case of helping them to adjust, to that they may not be getting all of what they might have thought that they're having, especially if they're the bill payer.
Yeah. And that goes all the way back to that initial communication, set out what the key expectations are and what the non-negotiables are for those people.
Also extending from that though is not only just looking at what their expectations are, but introducing what the other family's expectations are, and also introducing them to what those elements, like how this works, because as Latoya mentioned earlier in her example, the other side of the family didn't know about the other side of the family, so and it turned out that it was all fine and everybody could have what they wanted. But because you might find
they don't know what they don't know,
exactly, your family might not have done the research into their family's cultures or beliefs or whatever it might be, and therefore that actually you need some education about that too. So again, it's opening up everybody's eyes, which is wonderful. Like that's a hugely welcoming experience to say, you know, going to someone else's family and saying, this is my background, this is my heritage, this is how we work, and these are why we have these traditions, because it comes back to respecting our elders, it comes back to signifying that our worlds are coming together, or, you know, explaining why you're doing those things. Again, just getting everybody's buy-in from all sides can make for a much happier day if everyone understands what's going on, which also goes back to little that you can bring on. And we touched on this very quickly in terms of decor and how to introduce decor, but I know that Latoya and I have both done weddings where we will have, like, the order of service, for example, will actually be far more detailed and have explanations as to why these things are happening. So even if we've got our secular friends attending these weddings, then our friends will know why we're doing these things. And the other side of the family will understand the other side of the family. And all of this stuff, so it's just, again, about getting those expectations. It's about explaining and understanding everything. That communication is really important. And again, explaining why you've got certain elements of decor, why you've chosen certain colours for your flowers, or why you've chosen certain flowers, for example. They all have meaning. They might come from a country. It could be something as simple as, you know, I might have a Welsh heritage, therefore I want daffodils. Like, it could be something very, very simple that we're all very aware of. But actually, there might be people in the room who have come from another country and don't know that. So, yeah, just introducing all of these elements as part of your day and having that explanation really helps as well.
What I've found over the years is it's actually quite surprising how similar things are across all weddings. So you may do it in a different way. So, for example, we are used to, in Britain, exchanging rings. In an Indian Hindu ceremony, you will exchange a garland of flowers. So, you know, it's very, the symbolism is very similar, even though you are doing it differently. So the concept of giving away of a bride, although it is a bit archaic, to be honest, but the concept of it does exist in most weddings, in most wedding cultures. The concept of sort of unifying each other through the giving of and receiving, sort of the exchanging of something, is there. There's a lot of stuff that is very, very similar. We just maybe do it in different ways.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I think as well with the whole explaining everything and giving guests and your families even more details actually just adds to the personal side of it, really, doesn't it? Because, you know, I could have a wedding and sort of my partner and I could have table names of different places that we've been, right? But what stops you from having the different national flowers, and what stops you from explaining all of those different details to guests so that it really becomes a personal experience and even more memorable, which I think is really important.
It's about you two at the end of the day, right? And you want people to walk into your wedding and go, I know exactly whose wedding this is.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we'll move on to the next question, which, you know, I would say that the venue is probably, for me, one of the most important parts when I plan a wedding. But would you say when it comes to a fusion wedding or an interfaith wedding, that it's one of the most important parts of that? Because here at Guide to Brides, we get asked so many different questions from couples. And a lot of the time it's about, can you help me find a specific venue that can fit my needs? So a hotel with a capacity of 600, or a country house that can do a fire ceremony, just to give a couple of examples there. But how do you go about finding the right venue that will allow for your interfaith or mixed cultural needs?
So it's a really good question. So if you're doing this yourself, it is it's the starting point. It's the anchor for the whole wedding, because wherever you're going to host it, you will have the limitations that come with that space. So things you'll need to think about is you need to think very, very early on about generally what you're hoping to achieve with the day, generally how you might wish for the day to flow, what sorts of things you might wish to incorporate. Have a wish list. It doesn't mean you're going to do all of it, and it doesn't mean you're going to do all of it in that order, but you kind of need to have an idea of the types of things that you would like to be able to do throughout the day, because until you know that, and broadly you guess out, but until you know that type of stuff, it's very difficult to select the venue. And I cannot tell you how many times we have had couples who booked a venue, then come to us, then we start getting into the detail of it and go, I want to do this, and it's like the venue is not going to allow you.
Nina is nodding like, I'm so enthusiastic.
Wow. This wasn't the venue for you if that's what you wanted.
Yeah. But do you know why? And it's so infuriating, because actually it goes back to, there's two things here. The infuriation is because, as I said before, we as an industry are waking up to something pretty late on. And what we're hoping is that, you know, lots of venues are open to adapting and accommodating specific needs where it's possible for them to actually do it. So maybe like with the fire, for a Hindu ceremony, is actually have an explanation as to what the fire is, how long it's alight for, how big this fire is, and what happens around the fire, just putting the venue at ease that it's not a huge
It's not a bonfire.
No, it's not a bonfire. It's very small, it's very contained. And if a venue like the Savoy can do it, then I would like to think that more venues can do that. And that's the frustrating part. The other reason why I'm kind of like agreeing with this so much is because, going back to what we said originally about making sure you understand the nuances of your day before you book your venue, it's so important for a blended fusion wedding, like so important. So when you're looking at things like food, if you have got to get specific catering in, will your venue accommodate that? Will they allow for halal, kosher, whatever it might be?
And dry hire is not the same across all venues. So even if they tell you it's dry hire, you need to understand what that means. Ask more questions.
Yeah. And it is about looking at the capacities of the room. Can they accommodate your numbers, right? And this one really gets me, is you might say, okay, well, I've spoken to my family. Actually, I know that we're going to be looking at 250 people. This venue can host 250 people. Great. But we're going to have dancing in between each course, or we're going to have big dancing to come in, or actually my friends are putting on a dance just after the mains and before dessert, or anything along those lines. Does that capacity allow for that dance space as well as your 250 guests? Because 9 times out of 10 it doesn't. We're halfway through having these conversations about how the logistics of the day are going to work, and they're like, oh yeah, and I come in and I'm like, well, where's the dance floor going to go? This is at full capacity for this, and yet we've got huge dancing going on between the courses. So those are the kind of conversations you need to have at the beginning.
And just to go on from that, it's also things like, are you wishing to have your bar in the room? Because if you are, then you need to accommodate for the space to have a physical bar unit in the room, plus your dance floor, plus your tables. Your capacity at 250 is no longer 250. If you are looking to have a ceremony on a stage, that is different to having a registrar turn up and you have a table at the front of the room, and that's the amount of space requirement that you have. These stages are going to be a good 16 foot by 16 foot minimum. So, you know, if the venue is telling you can have 250 people seated theatre style, you probably cannot when you put that stage in. So
but also going back to your bar comment, okay, well, is there a bar in the room that is going to be in the same room as having your manda? If so, we've got a problem, you know, because we can't have
potentially
alcohol in the room.
It's
these kind of nuances that you need to look at, and it's all about that initial conversation. So when we're looking at possibly having a secular civil ceremony, we love this, don't we, Latoya? We can never find a way of describing your typical English white wedding, cookie cutter type wedding. When we find the appropriate place for that, we'll let the world know. But when you're having that, you do not need to think in this level of detail so early on at all.
And even corkage is another one. So they may be allowing you to bring in your own caterer. It may be that you have to get the bar through them, or they charge you corkage. We have had people trying to charge like £15 a bottle, even for a bottle of beer. Like, you need to think about this. And I know that a lot of weddings where you're blending with some other mix of something that's not your traditional English wedding, alcohol may be important in a way that's different to what you would have at an English wedding. So,
but also, what does that corkage include? Is it just beer and wine? Because then actually you're going to have a conversation with your venue and say, well, look, it's actually really important that my spirits are available to my family, and that my uncles want whiskey, and you know, this is, don't they just, and these are the kind of conversations. I want whiskey at the end of a wedding. These are the kind of conversations you need to have really early on, because
depending on your blend, you need to think this through. You have to think it through. And the other one I wanted to mention is around multiple room spaces. So if you're planning to host a ceremony, have some sort of a meal after, and then have a break, and then people come back for the evening events where you're going to have a big old reception, you need to think about what's going to happen with these people, these guests that you're inviting. Do you have to turn a room around, or do you wish to be finding a venue that has two spaces of a similar sizing that would allow you not to do that? What are your guests going to do in between? If they would like to change their outfit, which happens a lot, then where will they do that? Are you expecting them to go home, but you're hosting something in the middle of nowhere? What is going to be happening? Is there going to be a changing room available for guests? Do you need a male and a female changing room? Like, just a variety of things that you will need to be thinking about.
And I think that's a really important one when it comes to changing. And I know that a lot of the weddings that I do, because you're dropping certain traditions. So for me, it might be that actually not everyone's changing, just a couple are changing. Yes. But the message hasn't quite filtered down. So all of a sudden I've got 20, 30 guests who have disappeared, and I'm about to do call to sit because the food's ready, everybody else is ready, the couple have changed, but I'm down guests. Like, this venue has emptied out quite significantly, and I don't know where these people have gone. So actually, again, when looking at your traditions, it might be good just not just talking with your immediate family, but also spreading the word and putting in your invites or on your wedding website, what is it that you're going to be doing, and just making sure that maybe some of your more elderly or traditional family understand what you've incorporated and what you've not. So when I do come to do call to sit, I haven't lost 30 guests who have gone to change unnecessarily because that wasn't going to be part of this day, and therefore they're just going to have to eat when they arrive, because I'm not putting back my whole wedding just for them. Like, it's these kind of things actually that you have these conversations, and you put the word out there just that little bit wider than just your immediate family.
But you need to think about this stuff when you're booking your venue. Please think about this stuff when you're booking your venue. Otherwise, you will end up with a venue that you may love, but it cannot accommodate certain things that you wish to do. And therefore, if you had it in your mind at some point, or you didn't, or you decide later on that actually, you know, you just assume. There's a lot of assumption that goes on with wedding couples. You've assumed it's going to be fine. Please don't assume. If you're going for a venue that's a unique or historic venue, especially, do not assume anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I've been to lots of museum wedding venues that, you know, they actually physically can't have the fire ceremony because they can't isolate their fire alarms. It's just a logistical thing that's not possible.
And there's nowhere for you to change. You're not changing in the middle of some sort of an exhibition.
I mean, that would make for an exhibition, but you know. But I think it's a really good point though, in that, like, I've genuinely had couples, and I know you have too, Latoya, in that have booked a venue, and then when we got into the detail of it, it actually physically doesn't work for their day. But we're too far down the line, and then the couple are having to compromise on things that they can't or never wished to be part of the boundaries that they set and the expectations that they set with everybody. So actually, this, although we're kind of banging on about it, this is actually a seriously important thing to start thinking through very early. And it might be quite frustrating because, you know, when you're at the very beginning stages of wedding planning, you actually don't want to think into that much detail. You're still looking at the big picture.
They're excited. They've just got engaged. They're starting to look at venues. Like, I get it. I do get it. But you do need to, because we're specifically talking about blended, fusion, interfaith, etc., it is something that does come onto the radar quicker.
And also, you know, you're not just going by, like, before, you might have just previously been thinking about, I'm just going to go on location and guest numbers and maybe the style of venue I like whether it's a manor house or a barn or whatever it might be. Like that's kind of the big picture stuff that you kind of primarily want to think about at the very, very beginning, because you're in this beautiful bubble of just having got engaged and sharing the news with your family and friends. But unfortunately, because of the more detail that comes with a fusion and blended wedding, then we do have to kind of think about the nuances just far earlier on into the wedding planning process, which is I think probably the big takeaway from what we've been rapping on about is that you do have to think about the detail, you have to talk about the detail, you have to communicate the detail, and you have to do that a lot sooner than you normally would.
I actually wanted to add another question in here that I've been thinking about while we've been talking. Inviting people. How do you go about inviting guests who may be a bit more traditional, or maybe even just don't know what they're walking into here? You know, just how do you actually communicate that in your invitations on your wedding website? What kind of things can you be doing?
So I know what Latoya is going to want to jump in on first of all. On this. And
go on.
I'm going to say it's about who you're inviting first, and looking at those numbers, and then into how you invite them. Like, there is a big change and a big shift in the numbers that are coming to weddings now. Whereas traditionally your normal numbers might have been 300 to 600, it might be now 150 to 250. Whereas your normal numbers may have been 250, it's now coming down to 100. And actually, again, having those conversations about how many people you feel comfortable having at your wedding compared to what's expected is the first conversation to have.
We call those guest list negotiations.
And you've got your VIPs. You've got your VIPs, you know, your very important people that you cannot not get married without. You've got the people that your family consider VIPs, and then you've got your friends who your family might not consider VIPs at all, but to you are. It's about having those conversations first, because also not only do you have to talk about the communication of how to invite people and how to set their expectations, but also there's going to be some people that would expect to go. Who might not be invited.
So what the couple of key things I would add to this is, number one, if you're having multiple events, maybe consider inviting different people to different events. So if, for example, a particular event means a lot to the parents, maybe that gets filled with their guests. We had a couple many years ago who they had, before they were even engaged, they'd attended a wedding or something. Anyway, they had made this decision that they were going to have 35 people at their civil ceremony, and they wanted to host it at Clevedon House. So they told their parents this, and because they weren't engaged yet, their parents were told, they were forewarned, but they probably didn't process it completely. Anyway, the time rolled round, they absolutely had 35 guests, and it was at Clevedon House. But then it meant that their main ceremony, as in their Asian wedding ceremony, ended up being about 350 people, something like that. So that was the negotiation they had, is we want a really tiny civil, but you can do what you want with our Indian ceremony. So if you're having multiple events, that might be how you get around it. We've got a couple at the moment we're working with, and they have had to essentially create 2 receptions.
Okay.
Where after a civil ceremony, they're hosting a dinner with dancing of some variety. And it's a reception because there are some guests who are only going to attend that day. Then they're hosting also another ceremony, and they'll have a big reception after that too. So at least those people who are just attending one of the events is still going to get some sort of a reception. So this is the negotiation they've had to have. And so one of those events is going to be more attended by their friends, and another of the events is going to be more attended by family. It's a very... negotiations will exist. Like it's a thing, people. It's going to happen. If it hasn't started already, it is coming. But that is one thing you can do, is you can think about the various events that you're hosting and then have different guests at different ones, and that extends your guest list and gets everybody invited to something. One thing I will say that you definitely should never do because it feels awful. Do not invite anybody to a hen or a stag do that's not invited to a wedding event. Please God, don't do that.
Would anyone actually do that? Does that happen?
Oh, it happens.
Oh, that's
happens.
Nasty.
Please don't do that.
No,
So that's what I would say. And then Nina's absolutely right. Like, the guest list numbers are changing these days, and the other thing to bear in mind is that venues that can host certain capacities, if you're needing like over 250 people, it will slim down the venues that you can host your wedding at.
Also been thinking about, so once you've kind of done that work and you've done the negotiation side, is how you communicate. That can be quite tricky, and it is about adapting how you communicate to who you're addressing. Some you might have to keep quite more traditional for people who are older, for example, and they might need a bit more explanation as to the other side of your family, that it's coming together and how this is now working. Spend time with people. It's a lovely way. Like with your grandparents, for example, you know, if you're fortunate enough to have them at your wedding, go and have a cup of tea with them, go and spend some time with them, explain to them how this is going to work in detail, and get their buy-in, get them excited about what you're doing. And then also things like wedding websites, like they are so good for putting all that information on, having that explanation early. Also things like dress. Like if
I was going to say that.
Yeah, if you're expecting your guests to dress in a certain way, this needs a lot of explanation. Where they can go, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Latoya has this all the time. And it's about making sure that is absolutely kind of clear, understood and respected and clear. And
so we've had people who've used images of different attires. So they've said you can wear a sherwani, and then they've put an image of it on the website. They've given links to people as to where to shop. If you would like to wear Indian Asian attire, this is how you can do it. We have had people who have just said, just turn up in your traditional dress, which was quite fun because this particular person had people coming from all over the world. And so, you know, whatever you would wear to not even an Asian wedding, whatever you would wear to a wedding, wear that.
That's a really cool way of doing that, actually, isn't it? I love that idea.
It was a really nice idea. I really loved that they did that. You can also, like, the difference between digital and printing for invitations. So we're seeing a lot more people going digital, but it may be that there are certain VIP members of the family that get a printed version. So we are having people who do digital for everybody, and then they maybe print 50 invitations.
Again, we can think about communication and what to do during the ceremonies as well. So it isn't just about how we're going to invite people, but explaining as well what they should do at that time. Do they stand up? Do they sit down? Do they bow their heads? So we had, I've done several Chinese tea ceremonies now where they've wanted both sides of the family to come and participate in the Chinese tea ceremony. So there's been an explanation to them first about when they drink the tea, when they hand over the tea, at what point they hand the money, what kind of things they're meant to be saying and talking about at this point, who sits and who stands, all these kind of things that can be explained beforehand, which will also mean that your guests and your family and friends feel a lot more comfortable on the day.
Yeah. Do you suggest that if there is a specific ritual or something like the Chinese tea ceremony that has all of these really important stages that, you know, you need to carefully, I wouldn't say choreograph, but almost choreograph?
I think that depends on how big the wedding is, and if it's multi-day. I would say that Latoya's weddings probably have far more.
No, we don't rehearse.
I've
never done one. Briefings, like on the day briefings maybe, or like briefings with the person conducting the ceremony and the parents ahead of the days. Yes, that absolutely will happen, and they'll take them through what's going to be happening in the ceremony, at what point the parent does X, Y, or Z, where the parent is during this part of the ceremony, etc. But we've never done a rehearsal. Don't tell people, but we've never done a rehearsal.
rehearsal. I do think sometimes I wish I had, though. That would be nice to have the opportunity, but there isn't, very limited time, isn't there, leading up to a wedding. But what I would say is that although there might not be a rehearsal, there might be a best person, groomsman, bridesmaid, however it might be, who is on hand and understands every intricate detail of it. So I will always do my research and look into the types of tradition that's taking place at the weddings that I'm coordinating, but I always do like hone in on the, I don't know, the brother or the sister or someone who's, you know, immediate enough to understand what they want and how they're going to be doing it, which might be different to what I've read or what I've experienced or what I've heard previously. As we've said, different ways of doing things and different traditions within traditions and faith, and just become best friends with that person on the day, really, and just make sure that, you know, that there is always one person who's designated that can support the coordination of the wedding to happen.
That's a really, really good point. I mean, Latoya, you said earlier that you had a couple that were one side Bengali and the other side Gujarati. Like, I wouldn't necessarily, if I didn't do the research, I wouldn't know that there are differences there, but you can easily look up, oh, what does a Hindu wedding involve? But that might be completely wrong. So, you know, you need someone that has the authority to really be besties with.
You do. And I think if you're planning and coordinating your wedding yourself or within family, Nina's absolutely right. You need to think about which people in your family and friendship groups are going to be on point for different parts of the day. So if, for example, there is, I'm just going to refer to it as like tradition A happening, then you need somebody who knows what tradition A is and who is involved in tradition A. When tradition B or ceremony B happens, you need somebody who knows and understands that, who can be on point and who knows the faces of the people who might be involved in it. Please communicate that with people enough time ahead. Do not do it the night before. That is not sufficient time to get anybody prepped and ready to go. And equally, they may have had an expectation of turning up as a guest at your wedding, and actually you're asking them to perform a role. So please give them time to adjust, so they don't flat out refuse, or they just turn up on the day and they just don't participate. And if someone is going to be doing something after the evening reception has started and drinking has begun, you need to make sure that they do know this kind of stuff in advance, so that they don't get overly drunk too soon, and then they don't perform their role properly, or they decide to ad-lib too much. That's not fun. Get very cringy.
We don't like ad-libbers. They mess with our timings. The ad-libbers are not fun at all. But even if you haven't got a coordinator or a planner at your wedding, you will have someone on site who will be helping you with proceedings to some extent.
So they're not going to know the detail of things.
No,
they're not going to know the ins and outs of your ceremonies and your tradition. So
and it might even be that you've designated somebody who is a family friend or something along those lines. It might not be that there's a person working, but you may have designated a family member. So it is just important that they understand, whoever it is, understands the level of intricacy with that part of that tradition, what you're doing, but who is the point person who absolutely does know what you're doing at that bit, because there will be nuances that are different at each one.
Yeah. And communicate, anyone who's involved in a ceremony or tradition, let them know before the day as well. So that if it gets announced, such and such a, you know, I don't know, cousins, I don't know, whatever it is, sisters, brothers, whatever it might be, that need to get up at a certain point and do something, make sure that they know that that means them. We have done a wedding where like the entire groom side just continued to sit down. They had been communicated with before, but one of us then had to run up and be like, this is you. So do let them know.
Absolutely. I think we are coming to the end of this now, but we could probably talk about this for days. You know, there's just so much to cover. Thank you both so much. I think the key point is communication.
Yeah.
Talking, communicating with everyone involved in the wedding, all your direct family members, the people that are financially involved.
Yes.
Just make sure you actually communicate with them. Yeah, I feel like we could talk about this for months, actually.
We could.
There's so much to do and so much to talk about.
It is.
You did ask us on Nikita, you knew what was coming. Right. No,
I go back to my earlier point. It's your own fault.
Well, thank you so much to Nina and Latoya for joining me today. You can find their details in the show notes on guidetobrides.co.uk and in the caption below. it's been a fascinating discussion. And if you have any questions or any sort of comments that you want to raise for it, please do message us and we'll pass them on to Nina and Latoya. I'm sure they'll be intrigued to see if there's anything that comes up. But do have a lovely rest of your day and happy wedding planning. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.